Hey everybody, I realized that I hadn't mentioned or talked about reloading in a really long time, and for those of you who have watched my videos, probably like the 300 of you who have watched them from the beginning, you probably were thinking, man, I bet Jay doesn't reload anymore because, too many other things going on. And that is obviously not the case. I'm still reloading. For those of you who are more recently newcomers to the channel, sometimes I reload my own ammunition. Currently, I'm on track this year to shoot somewhere north of, I'd say 10 to 15,000 rounds. Numbers real variable. I just got done with a shooting class last week where I shot darn close to 1,500 rounds in 2 days. Man, my hands are sore. I digress. Work does pay for some of my ammunition, which is super fortunate. Like, I am blessed to have that, but the amount that I shoot, I don't think my bosses are interested in funding every last bit of that. Not only that, when I test a gun, every time I do a 1,000-round test, I buy a case of ammo, and I don't shoot reloaded ammo for that. I don't want to blame any problems that happened during those tests on ammunition that I created. So, it's only fair for me to go get a case of commercial ammunition. Usually I get Blazer brass, by the way. It is relatively inexpensive. It's been reasonably reliable for me. It always works. I have no affiliation with those guys whatsoever. But those rounds tend to work pretty well for me. Once again, another digression. So I go through a lot of ammunition is really what I'm kind of getting down to. And so for some of that, I reload my own ammunition. And I know that if you just look at pure cost savings, you can save money reloading in most cases. When you start to factor in time, a lot of people say, well, it's either a wash or you might actually come out behind. And those are valid arguments depending on how you want to really kind of factor your time versus value. Like if you're saying every hour of your time is worth, let's say you make $50 an hour, and it takes you an hour to load 500 rounds, you're probably not saving any money once you factor it all in. Like right now, one of these this is a bullet darn close to 10 cents just for that bullet. Primers are up to a whopping darn close to 10 cents a primer. So before you even factor in the powder, the case, and your time, you're up to 20 cents. Last few cases of ammo I bought were somewhere between 26 and 28 cents a round. So factoring all that, when I load 1,000 rounds, I've saved in theory somewhere between 60 and 80 bucks. So like I said, if you're looking at it, you go, maybe not for me, and I get that. In addition, when it comes to this, there is a meticulousness component to reloading, right? You're stirring together things that, if stirred together in an improper combination, can result in property damage, injury, and quite possibly death if you do things really, really outside the lines enough. And so I get why there's a whole nother group of people go, that's probably not for me. You're talking about, first you have to get your materials to reload. So you need 4 things in terms of the componentry plus the equipment to deal with it. And that's shell casings, bullets, primers, and powder. And then you need the application and the ability to stir them all together properly. That usually involves something to clean the brass, some sort of press that allows you to resize the brass, put a primer into your brass, put powder into your brass in the proper amount. That's critical. That's how you blow stuff up if you're not careful. And seat a bullet, and then make sure that it all will fit into your gun properly and function. Like I said, for a lot of people, that might be a bridge too far. I enjoy the process of reloading. At its bare minimum, I just enjoy the process. It's pretty fun. Like I said, it takes time, but I find it kind of like this moving meditation. Like, to give you some example, and I'll just show you. Like, here I am sitting at the press, and it's already set up. There's bullets here in the tray. The primers are already loaded in the tube. There's a little bit of powder in the powder throw. The brass is up here in the hopper, and so it comes down through this tube and ends up here on the, I don't even know what the heck you call this little platform. There's a technical term, and someone from Dylan or another reloader can chime in the comments and tell me how I'm more, and I don't remember all these technical terms. I do apologize for that. But when you sit down at this press, you are going to need to perform all those operations. And this press is a multi-stage press, so it does all those things for me at the same time. Stage 1 will remove the primer and it will resize the brass down to the correct size. The next part, the very next stage or step, will seat a new primer and put powder into the casing. The next step here is a powder checker. It's basically set up to alarm if the powder is wildly out of spec. Then one that will allow me to seat a bullet, and then finally one that will crimp or straighten out the shell casing so that there's no more mouth being belt open. And so for one pull of the press, and it looks like this, by the way, I always wear safety glasses just in case one of the primers does decide to go off. But you know, if I come over here and I place a bullet onto this shell and then I pull the crank all the way down, and of course it doesn't quite line up. So all of those things just got done with that one downward press of the crank. And then when I push it all the way back up, you heard the final cartridge, loaded cartridge, fall into the bin where I collect them. And then when I push forward on this crank, it seats that primer. That's really kind of the only thing done on the forward motion of the crank, except for rotating the stations to the next one in sequence. That kind of press is called a progressive press. There are ones that are simpler and cheaper that do everything singly. They're called single stage presses. Those are, in my opinion, good for maybe precision reloading work or for somebody who doesn't want the expense or complication of one of these. But I find for most individuals who reload, especially if they're doing it for pistol and they're trying to load a bunch of ammunition because they shoot a lot, really your only viable alternative, unless you want to spend a lot of time, is what this is, something similar to this called a progressive press. Now this is a Dillon 650, which they don't even make anymore. They have like an upgraded version of it called the 750. But the 750 is very similar to the 650 in how it behaves. And I think there's a lot of parts commonality. I would be shocked if there were not. Dillon makes more bare bones presses. They make higher end presses. And Dillon is certainly not the end all be all of reloading. There are other companies that make presses like Hornady, Lee, RCBS. There are some really, really high-end ones that cost thousands upon thousands of dollars that automate some or all of the process. And so, like I said, I'm not saying it's not a lot of work. It is a lot of work. But at the end of the day, I end up with a round that I made to my specifications in terms of powder charge, the primers that I specify, and I've tested it for accuracy in my gun to make sure that it works how I want it to work. Also in terms of recoil, impulse, everything. I don't know that you can put a price on that. In addition, if you stock up on primers, powder, bullets, and casings, anytime the market gets disrupted in terms of ammunition supply, you tend to have smoothed that out a little bit. It's kind of the ammunition version of dollar cost averaging. Now, yeah, you could just go buy a bunch of cases of ammo, sit on them for a rainy day, and I don't discount that either. I do a little bit of that as well, and many of my friends do too. That only makes sense. I know that the thought among non-gun owners and non-shooters is that, 50 or 100 rounds is wildly too many rounds. Like, why would you need that much ammunition? But if you're somebody who practices regularly, then 50 rounds is nothing. 100 rounds might be the start of a good practice session, maybe, depending on what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve. So having several thousand rounds available to you for your practice, your training, fun, whatever you need, to a shooter, to a gun owner, really starts to make sense, and it's not out of the question, doesn't trigger any red flags like, oh my God, how could you do that? And even if, somebody told me, oh, I've got 20,000 rounds in my basement, I don't think they're weird. I think I'm a little jealous is what I think when somebody reports things like that. Because obviously there's not just the cost, but the storage space and everything else. Like I said, I enjoy reloading and I still do it. I tend to do it in fits and spurts. Like I will go several months and not reload. And then I'll go, oh crap, I need some more practice ammunition. So I'll order several thousand bullets, and I'll sit down and I'll reload. Sometimes I'll sit down and reload like 1,000 rounds in one day. What is becoming more the case with me though is I'll sit down and load a couple hundred rounds, and then the next day or two when I have a spare, 15, 20 minutes, I'll come down, load another couple hundred rounds. So by the end of the week, I've still got close to 1,000 rounds in the tank, if not a little bit more, depending on what days I manage to do it. So it really depends on, I guess, what you can do with your schedule, your time, your endurance for sitting at a press and just running the crank and doing what you do. I often listen to podcasts or YouTube videos when I'm reloading. Sometimes it's background noise, sometimes it's stuff that I'm interested in. I don't find myself focusing very heavily on those things though, because obviously you've really got to pay attention to what you're doing when you're reloading. Like I said, you're stirring together some potentially hazardous materials if you're not careful and meticulous. Probably I should also mention that when it comes to cleaning brass, there is lead residue on that brass before it's cleaned. So one of the things I do is that when I dump that brass out of the vibratory cleaner through the sifter, I wear a respirator. I know that dust coming up, some of it's got to have lead in it. And so by virtue of that, it's not particularly good for you. I also do that outdoors. I do it in my driveway. I do not do it in the house. If you're somebody who is interested in any of these things, just be aware of that as well. And especially if you have small kids around the house, I'd be wary of that. I don't have small kids, but I do have one brain between my ears that I think is probably degrading at its own aging pace. I don't need to speed that process by inhaling a bunch of lead or other hazardous material. The last time I got my lead levels checked at the doctor, it came back like 0.1 in the slightly elevated category. I think it was like 3.6, which if you're a longtime shooter and you've had your lead checked, you're probably thinking that's probably not bad. But the doctor's like, well, just, watch what you're doing. And I'm like, oh, doc, if only you knew how bad it had gotten in the past. But I don't share that with him. Sometimes ignorance is bliss from that perspective. Anyway, like I said, I realized that I hadn't talked about reloading in a minute. Hadn't mentioned the things that I do and given you any sort of perspective on it. I still like it. Heck, guys, I tell you what, if I had $10 million in the bank tomorrow, would I still reload? I don't know. That's an interesting question. One I probably will have to address another time, I guess. Not that I have $10 million in the bank currently. But hey, if you like this video and subscribe to this channel, you probably won't help me a lot with that $10 million, but you will make me feel better about myself, which, to me is worth something. It might not be to you. So any YouTube help in that regard would be most appreciated. And heck, guys, if you hate my content, but you're still watching it, hate clicks taste as good as love clicks. I still appreciate you. I said it in another video, but I think I'm going to mention it again, guys. If you tell me you can do something 1,000 times, I'm going to believe you. If you tell me you can't do something 1,000 times, I'm going to believe you. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you're well. Take care. Stay safe. I'll talk to you soon.
Get 'em, Jay.